Good evening, and I believe we are live. Although it says on my, no, we are live. Good, great. Good evening, everybody. It's nice to see you guys. There are people that will be waiting. I see there's a couple of people in there tonight. Jennifer Hynes and Antonio Reid. We're going to talk about Alaska, and I'm going to open up just with a quick thing about Alaska, just to refresh your memory about our beautiful state in the United States, which wasn't always ours. It was a deal called Seward's Folly, and the United States purchased Alaska from the Russian Empire on March 30th, 1867 for 7.2 million US dollars at approximately what was 2 cents an acre. It went through a lot of different administrative changes before becoming organized as a territory on May 11th, 1912. But Alaska was a state, 49th state, on January 3rd, 1959. I have been fascinated with the state. It has gone through so many changes. And this is where I'm going to hand it over to start to Antonio and then Jennifer. And they're going to talk about some of the environmental and the permafrost changes. And here we go. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, thank you, Sandy, and welcome, Jennifer. Alaska is an absolutely phenomenal state for the people that's joining us. And as Sandy said, it was the 49th state in the United States. And right now, it's the premier state leading in climate change. It's warming faster than the rest of the continental United States. And I just want to bring this into context. In 2007, former governor of Alaska, Sarah Palin, Republican, came on the stage in Alaska and said that climate change was not only an environmental issue, but it was also a social, cultural, and economic issue important to all Alaskans. The reason why it's hard to deny climate change in Alaska is because it's happening so predominantly. It's changed the face of Alaska. Today, we'll talk about that. A lot of Americans forget, actually, about our Alaskan neighbors to the north. They are our only Arctic state. And like I say, they are witnessing the most alarming and fastest pace of climate change in the United States. But what happens in Alaska doesn't stay in Alaska. So we'll talk about what's happening in Alaska as far as wildfires. We'll talk about the state of permafrost in Alaska. We'll talk about the impacts on infrastructure, the impacts on ecology, and what climate change may look like. Is Alaska a possible precursor for what's going to happen in the mid-latitudes and around the world? So with that as our intro, I want to bring in Jennifer Hynes so she can give us her very well educated, informed opinion about what's happening in Alaska in regards to climate change.
Hey, thanks, Antonio, and thanks, Sandy. So good to be here tonight. Alaska's an interesting place, and you notice when these heat waves come in Alaska that there's kind of like a big push, and it always happens right there in the Bering Strait, right, you know, where the Russian little islands come together with Alaska, and you can always see the jet stream always makes a big push north right there. And it's like it's trying to push through the Bering Strait, and you always see a lot of influx of hot water from the Pacific up through the Bering Strait and into the Arctic. And, you know, as you said, Antonio, Alaska is our only Arctic state, and you can start to see these changes. The Arctic is changing like 4 times faster and getting so much warmer than it ever has been before. And one of the articles that Sandy is going to post is called "The End of the Arctic as We Know It." And the Arctic is changing very, very quickly. And there's so much heat going into the Arctic from so many avenues. You know, it's getting pushed up through Alaska. And then, you know, you see these big heat waves that hit Alaska. It's also, the Arctic's also getting warmed up from the Fram Strait and the Gulf Stream over on the east side. You know, it goes up the east coast of the United States, and it goes along the coast of Greenland, and then it hits Svalbard, and there's like kind of like a cliff underwater, and it just like pushes up, and you can always see how hot it gets right there in Svalbard, and that is the actual Gulf Stream that's pushed up this underwater cliff, and it always is very hot there, and that hot water goes into the Arctic too. So as the Arctic gets warmer and warmer and warmer, the jet stream starts to destabilize more and more and more. And I've seen pictures of the jet stream lately that are so worrying, because the jet stream, as we know, is driven by the delta, the change between the very cold in the Arctic and the more temperate regions. And that kind of hard edge traditionally has created this jet stream, hey, Torsten, all around, and that is actually getting destroyed. And Alaska's participating in that just geographically where it is. So Alaska's got a lot of permafrost, and that permafrost is thawing out very quickly now because these heat waves, you know, ice plus heat equals water or perma-mush. It's not going to be permafrost. And so we see the Alaskan area kind of like the canary in the coal mine, and we see it destabilizing. We see those islands along the Bering Strait and all through there. Those Alaskan islands have lost their ice that used to protect them. And so now, you know, I think there's one called Kalina or something. I don't really remember.
There's the Chukchi Sea, which now is not. I believe that it was, I mean, that one, and they're ice-free more than they were. I don't have the scientific term for it, but
you're right.
Much less. And it is affecting everything. And I listen to these phenomenal people from, I'm going to give them a shout out, from the Alaska Center for Climate Assessment and Policy, and I follow the dude on Twitter, and his name is Rick Thompson, I believe it is. And every time I turn down this thing, and they are doing some phenomenal work up there, and in adaptation, and you know, trying to help move. One of his tweets was, "Last month was the warmest June of record at Anchorage Airport. Also warmer than any June in pre-1952 Merrill Field downtown era. 4 of the 5 warmest Junes have been since 2013. Something's changed, but what?" And I will be putting up the website for them because it's really awesome, and they have some good stuff on there, along with, of course, Torstein's Going South and his stuff, the Arctic Sea Ice page. I mean, we have to give him a shout out because he is Mr. Ice.
Oh, he is. And don't forget Frozen Daughter. That's a phenomenal blog that Torsten puts together.
Yeah. Thanks, Torsten. Torstein. I always say Torstein. So, Antonio.
Yeah.
You're next. Where do you want to go?
Well, I wanted to really focus in on the state of the permafrost in Alaska. I mean, we've heard about from time to time, even in the recent IPCC report released in October, about the potentiality of permafrost releasing emissions into the atmosphere. So first, what is the threat as far as emissions are concerned from the permafrost in the Alaska? And what effects are melting permafrost going to have on future infrastructure, or at least as far as cost and damage?
A lot. And that's a big controversy up there about moving, especially the indigenous communities, moving them in. And this university does have this center has a whole thing on adaptation. The Adaptation Clearinghouse. I'm going to put all these links up because I'm fascinated with the work they're doing. Adaptation Clearinghouse, they seek to assist policymakers, resource managers, academics, and others who are working to help communities adapt to climate change. We should have that in every state. We should have it in every city, town, and country. But they're doing this because it's, what did you say earlier, Antonio? What is Alaska being touched by? Everything?
Yeah. I mean, what's happening in the Arctic, I think there's a couple of things I think it's going to increasingly become more important for American policymakers because, first of all, the United States is very clear. There's a lot of resources that Alaska or thawing permafrost, declining sea ice is going to give companies like Dutch Shell, for example. And that's access to methane hydrates, which I hope comes up later in the discussion.
Oh, it will.
But also things like that. And one of the things that I know that the Pentagon is particularly interested in is how much infrastructure damage is going to occur to possible new structures and pre-existing structures in Alaska, because we're literally seeing the ground melting so fast that buildings are really collapsing in their foundations. And that's not just in Alaska, that's in Siberia, but it's across the permafrost region. And also, you know, I'm concerned about what is this going to do, like you say, to the native population in Alaska. I mean, this is going to affect them economically. This is going to affect them socially. And we're looking at this, and the costs are really mounting up. One of the things that I looked at leading up to this conversation was there's a lot of talk about how much it's going to, as we get more serious about climate change and our response, adaptation, mitigation measures, how much is it going to cost? Well, Alaska is already looking at $5.5 billion in just retrofitting and upgrading its infrastructure alone to deal with what we're talking about, particularly changes in land stability. So we're not even talking about the cost of upgrading their electrical infrastructure, the power grid and things like that. We're just talking about fortifying buildings, in a lot of cases, just abandoning them to what's happening up there.
Well, sometimes there's not anything else to do but abandon them, because if you have built your entire town, which I'm sure there are many in Alaska, on permafrost, with the assumption that that ground that you've built your stuff on, you might have put some piles down or something to try and stabilize it, but essentially you've built your entire town on permafrost, and that means all the electric poles, all the water, all the sewage, the structures of the house themselves, they're starting to cave. So that means basically you're going to have ghost towns. You're now going to have permafrost ghost towns.
Ghost towns. Oh my
throughout
God.
Alaska. Yeah. I mean, well, what else can you do? Because you can't really rebuild it. You can't really repair it, because anything you do, it's just kind of throwing good money after bad. And once that permafrost starts,
they're climate disruption refugees.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're going to be entire ghost towns in Alaska, and who knows, maybe if we survive this, we'll have, like, you know, ecotourism of like permafrost ghost towns or something like that. But that's definitely going to happen, because what else can be done? Of course, they're going to be abandoned. And you know, you see a lot of these places up on the coast that border the Arctic Ocean, because that permafrost is just crumpling off and it's falling directly into the Arctic Ocean. And you can see whole houses that have been there for a long, long time. And, you know, each year, more and more of the cliff kind of crumbles off as the permafrost destabilizes. And, you know, now there's so many houses that are just like on the edges of cliffs, and then one day they just kind of fall in. And that's going to happen all along the northern corridor up there, with all the infrastructure that's built along the Arctic Ocean. So it's pretty grim, and it's very terrifying. It's very sad.
Yeah.
Johnny says, now we see the genius of the nomads. Well, they didn't know that it would that civilization would come along and ruin it. Wow. Well, you know, I wanted to ask you about, there was a which one of you would want to answer me on this one? Oh, the wobbly jet stream. So there was something, of course, I read about the jet stream and how it dipped down over the Midwest and the East, bringing the Arctic air and higher pressure all over Alaska. Is that what caused these temperature anomalies?
Yes, it's all the same thing. And that, of course, is directly related to the melting and the warming of the Arctic. So, you know, as the jet stream destabilizes, as we mentioned before, there's this big push that goes right up there and it pierces what used to be the jet stream. And actually, the jet stream is nothing like it used to be 10 years ago. The jet stream these days is kind of a bunch of swirls, and you do not see that very specific roughly pattern that used to go around the Earth. And when it's hot in Alaska, and I just kind of know this from following the weather and seeing kind of how it relates, a lot of times when it's hot in Alaska, it's cold down here in Colorado because whatever is left, the remnant of cold, creeps down the Rocky Mountains because that's a cool area and that's a natural place for it to. So a lot of times it's like a lot colder here than it is in Alaska, which seems so odd, but that's just, again, a factor of the jet stream. And while it's locked in that position, we have extremely cold weather for, you know, this time of year. And then as soon as it moves on and it breaks free a little bit and it kind of moves on, then all of a sudden it goes from pretty cold, like maybe in the 40s Fahrenheit or something, which is cold for the summer. And then it'll be blazing hot, like the next day, as soon as you're out of the jet stream, because the jet stream is now sort of like vertical waves that kind of go in and out. And as soon as it moves on, it gets blazing hot. So it can go from like, you know, there can be like a 50-degree delta in one day, just depending on which side of the jet stream, whatever's left of it, you're on. And it's remarkable how quickly it changes.
It's pretty hairy.
One thing I wanted to highlight about that is that obviously Jennifer Francis is paving the way in jet stream work. And one of the things that she talks about is like what you're talking about, is that these troughs create extreme weather on both sides. So you're having this, and a lot of times when we're talking about the models and we're talking about these events, we kind of forget how weird that type of weather experience is for the people who are there. I mean, one day you're really in a midwinter like situation, and then literally in the next week you're in summer. And we've seen this, you know, in the continental United States. I mean, I've certainly now seen just in May, and I'm here in North Carolina, just in May, we were seeing temperatures of 95 degrees. Well, the average high in the month of May for this time of year is 78 degrees. So we're doing for almost 2 weeks straight, 20 degrees over our average high. And in fact, it was hotter than even the hottest part of the year. And then just 2 weeks, you know, 2 weeks after that, we were getting down in the 50s at night because this jet stream trough had moved. And they see that more frequently. And I think it's more of a dominant feature in Alaska, because that's right where the jet stream is coming down, is through that region. Whereas, you know, the continental United States is spread over, you know, a much bigger area. So we don't see it affecting the weather as clearly as you do in Alaska. But there were times on another channel mentioned on YouTube, Collapse Chronicles, where Sam Mitchell was talking about it's cooler in Austin, Texas than it is in Anchorage, Alaska. I mean, how many times do you see that?
That's insane.
We don't. And I felt the same way, that it was ridiculously cold here. And I was putting it up on my Facebook. I would put the temperature here as opposed to places where it should be ridiculously much colder, and it wasn't. It was warmer. So, you know, I mean, I'm a extreme weather geek. Not that I know so much about it, but I'm a geek, and it fascinates me. But Alaska fascinates me. Let's go there. But see, I want to go there. It's a bucket list thing, but then again, it's traveling. And
there's this recent article is posed the question. I forgot if it was in the New York Times or New York Magazine. But there was a recent article that posed the question, should we see the world if doing so destroys it? You know, and
I probably won't see the world outside of this driveway, and you know what I'm talking about, Antonio. I don't leave very much.
Well, if you want to see the world, and I'll just kind of tell you a therapy I've been doing with myself, because I've been getting very, I mean, looking at all this doomy stuff like day after day, it gets rather depressing. So I have Netflix, and I just put on like all of the David Attenborough shows, like Planet Earth and all of these Frozen Earth, Planet Earth 2, Blue Ocean, all these things. And they're beautiful little series. And if you just need to take a break and re-establish yourself with nature and just see the absolute miraculous variety and beauty and intelligence of the natural creatures and systems on our earth. And if you want to create an emotional connection, just sit down, if you've got Netflix, and punch up any of those David Attenborough shows and just put it on and just watch every single one. And I swear to God, it'll suspend you in a magical place, because looking at all this doom and digesting it like year after year, it can kind of mess with your head. And you really have to reestablish your love and appreciation and gratitude of this magical jewel called Earth on which we inhabit.
Yeah, it is a
Family Guy. That works
Family Guy. Well, you know what? Everybody de-stresses in their own way. Lately, I was watching Green Acres, so because I feel like I live it sometimes. Let's see what Mike had to say, because Mike said northern subtropical jet stream has vanished that holds the heat from the equator from traveling north. 2019 is the year that the northern polar jet stream begins to vanish too. Either one of you want to respond?
I mean, Jen, I have something to say, but if you want to go first, that's.
Well, I mean, I really respect Mike and his comments, and he knows he is really up on all the science, and he understands the mechanics of it. And I also have noticed that the northern jet stream has vanished. And the other thing is, if you guys remember when Paul Beckwith a couple of years ago started making some videos about how the jet stream was actually crossing over the equator. You remember how controversial it was?
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, he's just, whatever. And he got a lot of flack for even mentioning that the jet stream could cross over the equator, but you could very clearly see it. And what Mike has just said, the northern subtropical jet stream is vanishing, because there are two jet streams. There's the northern one that goes right around, and then there's one that's another band closer to the equator. What Mike has mentioned is that southern one that is still north of the equator has vanished and is already fragmented. So that is in itself is going to give rise to all sorts of climate disasters, more sort of abrupt climate events, huge giant floods, and things just get very chaotic because there's no pattern. Like the last 10,000 years, we've had a really, really solid, calm climate that was held in place, by this jet stream that was like a little crown right around the earth that just kind of kept humming along, century after century after century. And now we're seeing it dissolve before our very eyes, and we're starting to see the consequences of that dissolution of the jet streams. And I think it's hitting the northern hemisphere more than the southern hemisphere so far. And that is because the Arctic is in such incredible collapse, and that's going to be driving the fragmentation of the jet streams up here in the northern hemisphere.
So
Yeah.
Jen and Antonio, does that mean that like Alaska, specifically since we're talking about Alaska, is really on the forefront of all this crap, and they're getting they're really starting to get the brunt of it? Because even the people, and as stupid as this sounds, I watch the Alaska shows. The guy that lives off the Yukon is finally saying things are happening to his homestead because of climate change, and I almost fell off the chair because they're very conservative too up there.
Right.
You know,
They are.
and they get money from fossil fuel industry for drilling the shit out of the state.
Well, there's a couple of things that I think I should bring people's attention to or just focus in on. And that is, this is what's underestimated by IPCC scientists. And that is, we aren't just talking about global warming or a transition in climate. What we're talking about is what Jennifer is referencing, and that is abrupt instability. So what happens is, as we've increased the energy balance on the planet, and the planet has to distribute that. For 10,000 years, in the Holocene climate, the planet had reached an energy balance equilibrium, and that's how we had the stabilized jet streams. But now, and it's not just that we warmed the world a degree, but it's the rapidity in which we warm the world. So this is also going to have an effect on how energy is distributed. And the way that we see that as biology is that's what happens to our weather patterns. Our weather patterns are how the energy is being distributed, either in a heat dome or in sporadic showers, things of that nature. And that's why it's so interesting, I think, in places like Alaska, is because they're seeing temperatures. I mean, a basic fact that everybody knows is that for every degree Celsius rise in temperature, you get about 5 to 7% more moisture in the atmosphere. Well, that's not just on a global scale, that's also regionally. So the entire hydroponic sphere of Alaska is rapidly changing. The way the water associates itself with the ground, the way that it associates itself with the atmosphere in Alaska is diverging quite sharply. And I think, for people who are interested in this, and because we talk about by 2030, we have put so much CO2 emission in the atmosphere that we would essentially replicate it at Paleocene climatic conditions. You have to ask yourself, well, what did Alaska look like 3 million years ago? Because that's where it's rushing, but only in the next 10 years, that's what it's going to look like. We're rushing way, way beyond that. And so I think we're going back to a primordial time for Alaska, where we could see a climate in Alaska that's actually not too dissimilar from a climate we see in places like Wilmington, North Carolina.
Well, today I was watching the video. It was phenomenal. It was from these guys up there in put on by the ACCAP. I watched the video. Everything was clear, and they were saying the growing seasons are getting longer, and that's foreign to them. The growing seasons are getting longer. It's wetter. July is like the wettest month. They're not used to it. The temperature's gone up by, I don't know, 10 degrees in some places, like every year, It's just, and they're dealing with such phenomenal craziness.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when we talk about the growing season, I think, and a lot of people have said this about Canada, Siberia, and Alaska. First of all, I don't think that what we're going to find is that in the next, 30, 40 years, that these are going to be the new bread baskets of the world. First of all, those soils, the composition of those soils is starkly different than the Midwest, okay? And also, there's going to be extreme climate instability occurring in those regions. I mean, we're talking about climates that are not, growing food has to do with a warm, stable climate. That is not what's going to be experienced in the Alaskan regions. That's not what's going to be experienced at all. These are going to be places that experience the widest range of variability in their weather conditions.
Yeah. And I'd also like to talk about sudden stratospheric warming, because there's something that Mike just said here. We are seeing more methane atmospheric heat waves on, and now that's gone. But you know, basically,
ratio of,
oh, there it is. Yeah, we're seeing more methane atmospheric heat waves on the mixing ratio of methane. So that's absolutely true. And what they've been seeing too is, and it's just fairly new over the last couple of years, this sudden stratospheric warming. So this atmosphere very high up in the stratosphere is warming significantly. And that's going to drive abrupt climate change disruption as well. So it's kind of like above us, it's below us in the ocean. The ocean is heating tremendously. It's with us, you know, right here at eye level. You know, the Arctic sea ice is rapidly going away. And I looked at a Arctic sea ice GIF, you know, one of those animations over like a month period recently, and there's just no thick ice left in the Arctic. And that chunk that was above Greenland, where all from the Beaufort Gyre in the Arctic, you know, when that thing spins around, you know, the water comes in Alaska, you know, the Bering Strait, and then at the Beaufort Gyre kind of brings it around, and then it kind of gets spit out the Fram Strait on the other side. Well, that Beaufort Gyre used to create a huge buildup of ice just north of Greenland, and that was the thick ice that was left, but it was really just a product of it being kind of smashed up the north of Greenland. But even that is gone, and I believe it was last year, that whole bit of ice right in the north of Greenland just melted. So the thing is about this, we're so close to the cusp, it still kind of looks normal if you're not looking at how things are. But, you know, even the ice that's left in the Arctic is really crappy ice. It's really fractured. The concentration is really low. It's not high quality ice, and it's of course much thinner. So the overall Arctic sea ice volume is gone way, way down. And I suspect within the next 5 years, we're definitely going to have a blue ocean event, which means 1 million square kilometers of ice are left, you know.
I have a question. I really do want to ask this, because this is what Matt put up, and it says the dryas, does it raise a bell? And it's the near great glacial, named after a flower, and that grows in cold conditions that become common in Europe during this time. But it says it's a return to glacial conditions, which temporarily reversed the gradual climatic warming after the last glacial maximum.
Yeah, I know about that.
Yeah, it sounds interesting as hell. Yeah. I would like to know.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I can attack that one unless you want to go for it, Antonio.
I don't. The only
Matt,
I'll let you handle this one. I think that you probably know a little bit more about the young dryas.
Okay. So at the end of the last ice age, like say 14,000 years ago, things began to warm up significantly, and there was an event that was kind of, they think they've done a lot of research on it, and it has to do with the shattering of a comet. It was either a comet or a meteor, but at this point they think it was a comet. And it happened a couple of times, and there was, as things began to warm, there was some sort of comet that sort of fell apart in our atmosphere, and it came down, especially in the north of Canada. Ken may know something about this, and it created like this cooling situation for about a couple thousand years. I think for about 12,000 years. So it was warming up, and then the temperature dropped for about 1,200 years. And I believe it had to do with this comet that fell. And then all of that debris kind of, you know, filtered out. And that was called the Younger Dryas. So it was a cooling spell in the midst of a warming trend.
So where are you, Matt? Because I wanted to know.
Did I hit it on the head, Matt? Why don't you comment?
I hope he didn't leave. I know. I hope he didn't leave, Matt, because that I wanted to know, and that was a good explanation. Matt's going to come on. He's going to come on. He's also a climatologist, but he is doing so much work in Florida. He's really doing awesome work on the ground with animals, little animals and amphibians, and interesting person. I'll hook you guys up. Oh, Matt's here. He will come on, and I made him an admin of the group, so he knows a total lot. So we get that, Matt? Did we do it okay? I thought, Jennifer, I understood completely. So thank you. It's all kind of scary stuff. I don't know. Go ahead.
One of another changes I think is going to occur with the decline of the Arctic sea ice is the center of polar mass is going to move to be more squarely over Greenland, as opposed to kind of what we think of where the North Pole is going to be. So I wonder what dynamics or effects that's going to have on the polar vortex and weather conditions for states like Alaska and Canada.
Well, yeah, I mean, as soon as that Arctic sea ice goes, there's nothing going to be keeping the Arctic Ocean cold anymore. And the Arctic sea ice right now is acting as a buffer, keeping the temperature of the Arctic right around freezing. But that's, as soon as that sea ice goes, it's just the Arctic Ocean is going to get very hot. And the only cold mass going to be left is in Greenland. It's going to take a lot longer for that Greenland ice sheet to melt. So any semblance of a jet stream is going to be circulating more around Greenland at that point.
And like we were talking about, what what happens in Alaska, what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. One of the things that I'm doing kind of as a sidebar in my own life is I'm essentially pleading with the Federal Nuclear Regulatory Commission to upgrade safety standards and protocols to the Barneswood Nuclear Facility in Wilmington. And there's two reasons why. First, as sea level rises, the projections in 2007 were 3 feet, a meter of sea level rise. NOAA 2017 is talking about we are currently on a trajectory of 9 feet.
In what time frame? 9 feet by
2100.
By 2100. So 2 years ago, I believe, Paul Beckwith came out with some sea level rise calculations based on the exponentiation, because the thing is, what people always forget is there's so much exponentiation. And Paul Beckwith has said in the past that by the year 2070, he expects to see, factoring in the exponentiation faster than expected, we're on that slippery curve, 7 meters.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, and I believe him, because and most of it happens in the last 20 years of that calculation, because everything is going faster and faster and faster.
Well,
so
James Hansen came out in 2015 with his paper published in the National Academy of Science, Sea Ice Melt, and he was predicting over a period of 50 to 150 years, 3 to 5 meters. So that's like with the midpoint being 2100. So, and people were saying Hansen was being alarmist, and obviously Paul Beckwith's estimation being extremely alarmist. But what are we seeing just in the span of 10 years? The worst case has moved from 3 feet to possibly 11 feet. The current trajectory, and that's the point that I'm making about NOAA, the current trajectory is 9 feet. But they create another scenario called their extreme, which shows about 11 feet. And that calculates in or tries to incorporate all the parameters we know about rapid ice deglaciation, thermal expansion of the ocean, and things of that nature. But the second point I wanted to bring up about really the collapse of our jet streams and what that means for us in the mid-latitudes is that we're seeing ocean temperatures warm where we are, particularly where I am off of the eastern coast of the United States. And with the jet streams act as steering winds for storms. And so we're gearing up because of the failure of our jet stream to face catastrophic storms that stall over land. And part of the mission that I'm kind of undertaking now is to push the Federal Regulatory Nuclear Commission to upgrade their safety protocols in dealing with extreme weather phenomena, because we're talking about a situation where storms are not going to be just dropping inches of rain, but feet. Harvey dropped 5 feet of rain. You got to remember that.
Yes, exactly. And then if you are starting out in that, let's say Harvey hits that area in Houston or whatever in 30 years from now, and the sea level is that much higher and the oceans have expanded that much more and the hurricanes are like that much more powerful and they are like not progressing and they stall, as you say. So what happens if you've got 3 feet more of sea level than you have right now, and you have a Category 6 hurricane stalled over your city, pushing the tides into your city? Yeah. Your city is going to be full of fish. Whatever fish are left in the ocean, all that stuff is just going to come right. I mean, your city is going to become ocean.
And we saw this, people, I just saw in the comments, people were mentioning alarmism and doomerism. I'm sorry, my friends, I'm in North Carolina, and we very well witnessed this almost happen in 2018. We had Hurricane Florence being predicted by the National Weather Center is going to be a Category 5. Our entire state was declared a national emergency.
You don't have to apologize, though. Nobody here is putting you down for any of that. We're all feeling the same way.
I just want to make the point that this is not doomerism or alarmism. This is increasingly, as I believe Matt said, a redefining period. This is the period that we are moving into. These are the things that have to be considered now because we're seeing them happen. And the world that we built was built pre-abrupt climate change, and it was not calibrated for sea level rise. It was not calibrated for storms that stall over land for days, dropping feet of rain. And now this has become the reality that we moved into. Right now, CO2 measurements are what? 415 with no slowdown in sight.
No. Acceleration in sight.
Yeah.
If you look at that Keeling curve, they call it a Keeling curve because it's curved, and it's curved up, and it means the further you get along in time, the steeper the curve is going to be. And that curve represents the incremental increase in CO2 and other greenhouse gases. And it's getting faster, even as we make our feeble attempts, and I wish they weren't so feeble, to curb our civilization CO2 emissions. Maybe, California might make some attempts, and different kind of pockets will make attempts while other countries are going to blow it out, right?
India.
And yeah, so, I mean, and then, the population is going up, and we have to transition out of fossil fuels immediately, as quickly as possible, because the more CO2 and methane and all these greenhouse gases that are dumped in, the faster we accelerate this abrupt climate disruption that's happening around us.
And what Keith Boyd says is that CO2 415 doesn't include, it's not a CO2 equivalency number. The equivalency number is well over 500 now. And this essentially, it's incredible because, we think about our lives in the context of this stable, at least us in the Northern Hemisphere, because obviously people experience seasons differently in different geographical locations around the world. But we kind of experience it as part of our lived history, as the way that we kind of contextualize the world around us. Oh, I remember what I did last summer. I remember where I was in the winter. You know, I know what to expect when October comes around. But all of that is changing and actually really gone in large part, not just changing, but really gone. And we have to kind of calibrate ourselves to, well, actually we can't, because, you know, Paul Beckwith was trying to make this point earlier on in his career, is that there is no new normal. So it's really hard. You can't calibrate yourself to that.
It is a rolling, spiraling trajectory of disruption, and it expresses itself in a variety of different ways as it continues to careen out of control and spiral. And I don't think that this is doomerism, and I don't think that this is, you know, alarmism. I think this is realism. And I think there's a difference between realism and alarmism. And I have never considered myself to be an alarmist. I feel that I'm actually a realist.
I mean,
and you're an educator.
You're absolutely right. Like, me bringing up this issue of our nuclear facility wasn't me thinking about, okay, I want to have negative thoughts today and inject that into the world somehow. No, I'm genuinely thinking about, first of all, I'm a highly intuitive person. And so I start putting these things together. I'm like, oh my God, it's not just sea level rise. We just watched what happened in Harvey. You know, you put these two and two together. It's not because what happened in Harvey is a freak accident and never going to happen again. No, the probability of it happening is now increasing.
Indeed.
If we want to make decisions that are going to be meaningful, it's going to have to be with this realist mentality, that we can't be nostalgic about the past and we can't be paralyzed about the horrors of the future. We kind of have to be sensible about this. We have to realize that there are going to be major impacts, and think about it kind of like, I think about it in the sense of, a general knows that when you go to war, you're going to lose soldiers. Okay, so there's no plan that exists where no soldiers die. Okay, there are plans that exist where you minimize that and you mitigate that. Okay, and you try to go for the best plan that's going to get the task done with that understanding. Right. So as we approach this new climate epic, that is the type of mentality that I think is going to be the most productive in building resiliency. It are people who are looking out into the horizon and have a sense of what's coming and have the wherewithal and the will to build up defenses and preparedness for that. And that comes along with this discussion that we're having today. The impacts that we're seeing are very, very real, and they can't be denied. We talk about this in
I don't know what happened. That was the freakiest thing. It was the freakiest thing. Here, Antonio's coming back. Yeah. Why can't anything go off without a hitch? Well, what happened, Antonio? Okay. Why can't anything go off without a hitch? Ever. Oh my God. This was like, I look up.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Oh, we're back. We're back. Holy
Am I on
crap.
twice?
No. I see. No, we're fine. Hey, listen.
No, but I can hear myself twice.
Is your YouTube? Oh, maybe you are. I can't. Let me take you down.
Here.
All right. Wait a second. I can't. I'll put you back up.
Two selves in there. I didn't know you could join twice. That's kind of like being a clone of yourself.
No, something really goofy went on here.
That's okay. Right, it's free.
I want to segue a little bit. Could we segue a little bit before we end? I mean, and it's going to be incredibly sad, but we have to talk, at least I want to talk about the biodiversity. and what's happening from global warming and the ocean acidification. I'm just going to read this little thing, and then we're going to end with this. This significant changes include reductions in seabird and marine mammal populations and declining harvests of salmon on their return to spawning areas. Sea lion numbers have declined between 50 and 80% after the last few decades. The polar bear depends on summer sea ice to hunt seals. As the extent of sea ice shrinks, so does the polar bear's habitat. On land, scientists have documented a doubling of coastal erosion and lake changes in the last 2 decades, impacting critical habitat for caribou and migratory birds. Guys, I'm going to close up that thing, and I just want to talk about the animal aspect. And is there any, prolonging, helping, doing anything for these animal populations? Are we really past that tipping point for them?
I think that we are, unfortunately, and this is one of the things that pains me the most about climate change, is that, we talk about in big political jargon, the developing countries are least responsible and they're going to suffer first and worst. Well, as humans, I suppose, but the other earthlings are suffering first and worst. They have no abilities to escape exposure to extreme weather conditions. They have no ability to escape exposures to extreme climatic conditions. And, when we're talking about these temperature anomalies and these extreme temperature differentials caused by a collapsing jet stream, animals are very confused by that. This is what I call a biospheric shock. The animal kingdom that's being exposed to these extreme weather phenomena have not been exposed to these type of conditions in the last, 800,000, 3 million. I mean, you really say, because it's the instability. It's not just the warming; it's the instability. So, these animals are clearly not evolved to deal with this. And this distorts hibernation patterns. This distorts migration patterns. This distorts reproduction patterns. And really, as far as the damage that climate change has done to the biosphere, we're way beyond the point in which that's tipping.
I agree with you, Antonio. We are tipped off. We aren't like approaching the tip. We're tipped off, and it is tragic. It is hugely tragic, and it is the irrevocable curve of this abrupt climate disruption trajectory that we're on.
Right.
If we were just dealing with the current state and nothing was going to change, right? Because we keep thinking, well, is there any hope for the animals? What can we do for them? We can do as much as we feel we can, but the way this earth is going and the weight of our civilization on it and how we have affected the entire nature of the earth, the functioning of the earth, I don't see that there's really any hope. I think it's tragic. It's incredibly tragic, and we are here to witness it. I don't see any way out for the animals or for ourselves to be honest.
And so as long as we're alive, we have to witness this.
We have to witness it, and we
feel
can
it. We're causing it.
We can do whatever we feel we can within our own personal sphere. But the problem is so much bigger, and it's just marching on year after year. So we're seeing the beginning. We're in the beginning stages of abrupt climate disruption.
There was the David Attenborough, you were talking about him earlier on Netflix. Well, there was one of his videos that showed the walruses climbing these peaks. and these sharp rocky peaks and cascading to their death, because at one time I believe it was the ice was at that level, but it had so vanished that it was no longer there, and so what was a fairly safe journey became a suicide march. It's this type of, but I say we see this a lot actually now happening in the animal kingdom, where we see species doing things that they ought not be doing, and it seems so strange, and it's almost appears to be, in our view, suicidal. We've seen this in bees, we've seen this in dolphins.
Whales beaching themselves.
So,
and it's almost like they decide to all do it en masse together. You know, I mean, when you see these whale and dolphin beachings, I mean, they're utterly tragic, but they're
starving.
They are, but it's almost like, it feels almost like they've made some sort of agreement or decision to let's all of us go and throw ourselves on the beach. It's horrible.
Oh,
it almost, it's the way I've described it is in this final act. You know, if you think about this as a Shakespearean play,
right,
all of the actors have now just been engulfed with this sickness, this great derangement, right? And we see it now. I mean, the humans too. I mean, we
humans
develop,
especially.
we're the most deranged.
Yeah, nobody's got anything on us when it comes to derangement. Believe me.
Jesus Christ. So all of the species now are, that's what it's a state of biospheric shock that we are in my own backyard. I was telling Jennifer before the show that I break my life down into two periods now, before college and after, because the climate, things have changed so much in my own backyard in 5 years that I can tell the spiders, they come out at different times, the wasps come out later, the lightning bugs come out earlier than I've ever seen them. The peach tree. I mean, everything in my backyard is from Willy Wonka now, or from The Wizard of Oz. It's just unreal, and it made me break down and cry and realize that climate change is not just a change in where the clouds are and how much rain is coming down and a hurricane. It really is a change in the entire interface of the surface of the earth. And that is such a magnificent change. I mean, the idea that human beings, that's part of the great derangement, the idea that we have these people in white lab coats coming around and talking about, oh, 1.5 is safe as long as we keep it below 2. You know, it is absurd. I mean, clearly the Earth system is much more sensitive than what humans. We don't have the spirit to be in. We're not in touch with it. We don't have the knowledge. Obviously, the planet is a lot more sensitive to what we're doing to it than what we know.
Wow. Well, we've been about an hour, and I usually can't download successfully for YouTube anything after that.
Well, we better hurry up and
or Jennifer, I'm going to have you download it, and we're going to have to figure it out. Or I'll have to ask Max from Finland, because he'll do that for me too. He's probably sleeping right now. But why don't each of you give a closing statement? And everybody, I'm just going to say thank you for coming. You're all awesome, and I'm going to give it to them.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, here we are. It's ours to witness, and it's ours to comprehend and feel compassion and wonder in this horrible and mysterious time of climate disruption. We are seeing something that our ancestors have never seen, and we're going to see great adventures going on in the future. So I think, you know, just do what you can in your own personal sphere, but keep your eyes open and watch what's going on. It's happening fast.
Thanks, Jennifer. And I just want to piggyback off of that. I think that's why I have so much motivation in my life, is because you can only influence what's immediately in your sphere. And even when you see that the worst is ahead, that the road gets darker, you have all the opportunity to lessen the pain and make other people's lives more pleasurable, more enjoyable. And it really is about getting in touch with that. You're right, Jennifer. It's ours to comprehend. It's ours to wrestle with. And I am a person who believes that struggle is enlightenment. And so we're here, and all we have left is to make the best of it.
That was, you know, and I'm going to end with Janet. Listen to the indigenous on how to live with Mother Earth, not on her.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Janet. And at that, thank you, everybody. And we're going to say goodnight. And we really appreciate you guys coming and your support for Environmental Coffee House. And Jennifer and Antonio and myself, we're all Environmental Coffee House. And hopefully these guys are going to do great stuff when I'm like too disabled to. And I'm looking forward to seeing where this will bring us and what we can do to educate like tonight and have these discussions with people and share them. So thank you and good night, everybody. Peace.
Good night.